So people are developing even later today, it seems like. But chronology does not alter the fact that a human being is a human being from the moment of conception onward. Conception and circumstances do not determine the value of one's life. And so Jeremiah was valuable from the very beginning of God's plan. Second thing I want to mention is in chapter 2, verse 1. Chapter 2, verse 1, we read, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me," that's to Jeremiah, saying, "Go and cry in the hearing of Jerusalem, saying, Thus says the Lord, I remember you, the kindness of your youth, the love of your betrothal, when you went after me in the wilderness." God imagines himself married to his people. God is the faithful husband. What about the bride? Well, here the bride is, we see, presented as unfaithful. And the bride, God is saying, I remember you. I remember you in the early days, in the courtship, or when they were first married. He says, I remember those things. Verse 3, Israel was holiness to the Lord, the first fruits of his increase. All that devour him will offend, disaster will come upon them, says the Lord. Hear the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, what injustice have your fathers found in me? They have gone far from me, and have followed idols, and have become idolaters. Neither did they say, Where is the Lord, who brought us up out of Egypt? She's an unfaithful wife. That is, God's people has become unfaithful to the marriage of God and his people. And God is questioning all this. He says, I remember you, but the problem is, they don't remember God. We're living in times where people are still forsaking God. But the problem is not that the world forsakes God. God expects that. Those who are away from him in sin, they've done it already. But what shocks God from the standpoint of bewilderment and amazement, and he marvels at this, is the fact that God's own people, after he's been so good to them, will choose other things to worship idols instead of the true living God. They will turn to their own pursuits. They will forget God. God says, I remember you, but they don't remember God. There's a danger in God's people forgetting God. We see a pattern in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, when God's people would drift away and forget God. In Hosea chapter 4, verse 6, Hosea says, my people, God said, through Hosea, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. That is, they were not retaining God in their thinking. Now let's think about this just a moment. How does this happen? Well, there are two ways that people can forget. They can forget not meaning to, and they can forget deliberately. Let me see if I can point this out. We live in the age of distraction. Everything in this modern world is around us to try to grab our attention. Advertisers spend millions of dollars. Alexander Shannara has every billboard out there now, it seems like, trying to get our attention. And then you find Mayor Bloomberg spending his millions and maybe even billions of dollars running for president. And then President Trump has his own money and people donating money, trying to get people's attention. But not only that, we have telephones and all kinds of things on the internet, TV, all kinds of channels, people clamoring for our attention, responsibilities we have, things we want to do, things we're interested in. And it can be information overload. And the devil knows that he can wean us away from God through distraction. People get too busy for God. And Christians can lose their first love by being attracted to things away from God. That's why God says in 1 John 5:21, my little children, flee from idolatry. Now, we may not bow down to a little Buddha statue like they've done in the past, but if we are more interested in sports than we are God, or if we're more interested in fashion than we are God, or celebrities, or our own hobby or pursuits than we are God, then we are not choosing to retain God in our knowledge. Let me give you an example of, well, we've looked at distraction as a way that we might forget things, not meaning to. I forget these glasses constantly. Not because I mean to. It's just I get so distracted with everything else. It's the last thing I'm thinking of until I need them. So I'm working on not doing that. Saw a book last night. It said, How to Clear Your Mind and Free Space so that you will not forget things you need to remember. That's a long title for a book. Kind of clutter your mind with that title. But if you want a copy of it, they have it at FedEx office on University Drive. But anyway, it was really talking about, not letting your mind get so filled with clutter that you're forgetting everything. So there's some strategies there. But really more importantly is the willful forgetting. There's a negative side and a positive side. Let's talk about the positive side. Paul said, this one thing I do, forgetting the things which are behind, pressing forward to the things which are ahead. He wanted to willfully forget the fact that he used to be a very sinful man. And he was trying to put that in the past and move on to his goal. That's good forgetting. There's another kind of deliberate forgetting that's not good. It's negative. And this is when people deliberately forget God. They're scared of God, or they don't like God, they're mad at God, whatever it is, they just will not retain God in their knowledge. Let me slow down with that. They will not retain God in their knowledge. There's a verse in Romans 1:28 where people are getting on the road to sin and talks about God giving them over to a mindset where they're doing things that are wrong. He gives a long list of things that they're doing. But he says these people will not retain God in their knowledge. Therefore, God gave them up to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not fitting. And among that list, of course, we find unnatural vices such as homosexuality and murder. We've been talking about that this morning. And so when people will not retain God in their knowledge, it's a willful forgetting. How do people do this? Well, they may, anytime it gets serious and people start thinking about very serious questions, they just put it out of their mind. They don't want to think about hell, or they want to deny hell, or they don't want to think about God, but may even try to deny God, become an atheist, or say, I'm an agnostic. They just don't, they choose not to know. But it is a deliberate thing. The Bible even talks about this, they willfully forget that with the Lord, one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. You can willfully forget things that you really need to remember. And so, people forgetting God when God remembers them. God is faithful. He will remember his people. But the question is, will his people remember him? In the Old Testament, over and over through the book of Judges, they forgot God. God warned the people Moses was leading, teach the children so they won't forget me. Teach the next generation so they won't forget me. And when Joshua took over, Joshua had to warn the people, don't forget God. Don't forget the one who led you out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, led you through the Jordan River, into the land of Canaan, and gave you the land to possess. Don't forget God. Even set up a memorial of rocks and said, when your children ask, what do these stones mean? You tell them that God who delivered you through the Red Sea and through the Jordan River, that's the God, the true living God. And so we are to remember God and not willfully forget him. There are some people on the radio I listen to occasionally because I like sports. I like to keep up with stats and things like that. So I'm in the truck. I don't like to listen to all that garbage. So I'm trying to find a sports station that kind of gets me up to speed. And I find some of these fellows are very, very knowledgeable about sports. There's one in particular I'm thinking of right now that he's got to be the most knowledgeable person of not just one sport. You mention any sport, and he has just got an encyclopedic knowledge. He must live, eat, drink, and sleep sports. That must be all that he has time for. And there's a part of me that's sad for him, because I'm thinking to myself, if this man spends this much time learning all these things about sports and keeping up, when's he got time for family, friends, for the purpose God chose for him, to know God's will? You see, if we fill our minds with so much of this world, we won't have space left for God in our thinking. What we've got to do is move the world out of our thinking and have the space that should be set apart for God. Let me put in the words of Paul in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. He said, I beseech you, or beg you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Our minds can be renewed, and we have to keep God in our knowledge. Now, how does that man keep so much sports in his mind? I don't know, number one, but I have an idea that he's smart. No question about that. But I also have an idea he's paid a lot of money to spend all his time thinking about sports. And that's a pretty good motivation, I guess, for him. Well, people get caught up in the pursuits of this world, and if they're not careful, they'll leave no time for God, for daily Bible reading, daily prayer, daily worship, daily feeding of the soul. We sang about it a moment ago. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Have you ever been stuffed that full? Have you ever gone to a smorgasbord or one of these, I call them feeding troughs, but you go to one of these places, pay one price, and you go back as many times as you want to. And after one or two trips, if you filled your plate full, you see how they're making their money. You just can't really eat that much unless you've got a real problem. And it seems that there are some that's what they're devoted to. But I don't know where I'm going with that. But maybe you saw my point there. But let me move on. It'll come back to me.
Feed me till I want no more.
Feed me till I want more. You kept it. Good. I knew you would find it. All right. If you get satiated, you don't want any more. And that's what we want with the Scriptures. We want to be filled so full every day, we are satiated with God's Scriptures. But I guarantee you this, that'll never happen. You will just keep eating and eating. You just want more and more. And there comes a point to where you find yourself needing this sustenance from God